This is the response halfway through the first honor submission. The checklist, underlining the thesis. Did you cite JSTOR articles in your supporting paragraph? It's kind of split. Did you watch the screencast? Portion of some, I watched them all. So it looks like people are looking at that. I don't know how helpful they are. I don't know if they're clarifying stuff. I don't know if there's anything else I need to do. And the screencast, look up your topic. All right, so that's a strategy. Keywords, phrases in your research. Yes, all right, so we're using the Control F. This one's interesting, the use of Amazon. I mean, that's just a strategy. Sometimes you find a book and you don't own the book, but sometimes some of the chapters are available, so you could cite that. Topic, so yes. Okay, analyze as how and why. Oh, this is interesting that it's split. Yeah, you want to ask those questions. How and why does the source you are selecting, support the thesis, answer the question in the prompts, anything along those lines. All right, so we're using the footnotes. We're define terms right in the past or present tense throughout history. So yeah, you want to try to avoid that. Be specific, from 1920 to 1921. That way the reader has some direction and you can't be held accountable for anything outside of those years. Slang such as dude. Did you use footnotes? Yeah, you don't want to put something offensive like genocide or, Bush was responsible for 9/11. You better justify those claims with some clear evidence. Staying focused. Did you review the hamburger method? All right. As a sign, started a week after, started working a day prior to. Look at that, started working immediately. So far we're at 3. All right, let's take a look at the question. Narrowing down the topic, locating primary sources, locating secondary, supporting the thesis in the body, and analyzing. So that seems to be the trouble area. All right, so I wanted you to look at the comments. Let me just kind of browse through some of these. My thesis could have been more specific, clear argument. Essay goes off topic, not historic. I often did not add a year, wow fact, and to show more imaginative work. Doesn't really say in this response what they're going to do in the future for that. My essay was very vague, had little specific details. Yeah, there's a fine line here. I mean, you want to be, specific, giving your reader some sort of direction as far as what you're looking at. Writing too much that goes nowhere. This is usually like, it just seems to be like a summary. Like I feel like I'm reading a Wikipedia page and I'm trying to figure out, well, what's the main point? What's the main point? Yeah, you're giving me all of this summary stuff, but how is that connected to the thesis? And that thesis should be unique because it's based on your research. Assumption, section, rubric. Yeah, you don't want to make assumptions. If as the reader I'm struggling to figure out and I'm trying to make a connection, that's an error on your part. The assumptions. Don't assume that the reader knows certain things. Don't assume that the reader can make the connection between the source, your analysis, and the thesis. My essay was not clear and lacked details that were relevant to the thesis. I like this. I can incorporate clear message to support my thesis. Like, feel free to go back. If you're arguing terrorism, say, this, you don't want to say this source connects to my thesis because of this reason. You have to kind of touch that up. But you kind of want to address that same point. Let's see, summary. I summarized too much of my essay. Yeah, we're trying to avoid summaries. Not convinced. This could be a result of, just the evidence. I just wasn't convinced about the way they analyze the sources or the source. It could be a combination of two. So as the reader at the end, I want to be able to, answer the question. Ask the question in my head. Do I feel that the student supported what they're writing? And am I convinced or not? It's just simply yes or no. So that's going to be a result of your evidence that you're using. A lot of filler information to stretch the length of the paragraph. Yeah, you want to avoid that. I don't need a filler. My thesis was very vague. It wasn't strong. Right? It had many violations for the items listed in the deductions. Supporting paragraph. I have to connect my evidence and reasoning to the thesis better without going off topic. Like I said, you want to make sure that you are, addressing the thesis point. You want to make sure that you're hitting that, asking those questions. How and why does this source matter? 2 points for being vague. Be more descriptive with my words. Sometimes that matters. I mean, I guess it's going to depend on what you're writing about. It's a fine line. Or flow. Usually, yeah, flow and transitions. If you just find yourself jumping into your source, um, you want to provide some historic context. Like the people writing about Lindbergh, so many times they didn't start with, aviation. What was aviation like in the 1920s? People writing about terrorism. What was the climate with regard to anarchy groups and socialist groups and communist groups in the 1920s? That gives you the context. So, you have your thesis, the one sentence, and then you should, provide some sort of historic context, for your topic. So if it's Armenian genocide, you should be writing about, the World War I climate and Armenians, and then transition to kind of what your focus is. That way the reader knows. For terrorism, many students just gave me the definition of terrorism, and then they just went into it. What about suggesting that writing things like about the 1920s climate and how the 1920s was about communist groups advocating for change, for economic change, and then then you can kind of get into the specifics, which would have been like the Wall Street bombing, and then you kind of just answering the question: was this an act of terrorism or not? Uh, yeah, the thesis is tricky. The more specific you are about your thesis, then the more the lack of I guess as on the reader, I can't really challenge what you're saying. What's going on here? All right. Anyway, so think about that. Like, sometimes a thesis is vague, and I don't quite. I could probably stretch it into so many different areas. The more specific you are, you want to think about it like you're locking yourself in a box. And in this box, you're telling me I'm only writing about 1920 to 1921, or I am only writing about one aspect of the definition of terrorism. And the beauty of doing this is that as the reader, now I know clearly that you are writing about this. So anything outside of this box is off limits. Like, even if I know as the reader that, yeah, in 1922, there was something that wasn't relevant or something that contradicted, you told me right here in the 1920s, 1921. I give you an example. In the Spanish-American War, there was a ship called the USS Maine. Look at this. The USS Maine. This thing was destroyed, and it led to Spanish-American War. Come to find out years later, as more evidence had come out, that the ship was destroyed by a bomb or an explosion inside the vessel itself. So if you were writing your paper and you said the USS Maine was destroyed by Spain, and that led to the Spanish-American War, that would only work for a certain time. I don't know the year where this actually gets finalized, where they determined it was on board. But let's just say that year was 1921. As long as in your thesis you're talking about, you'd have to change it around to say like something about the pre 1920 view or interpretation, and now you're kind of locking yourself into that time period. So it would be okay if you include political cartoons and sources and primary source documents that say that Spain destroyed the Maine, because you've given the reader, a time frame. So, like I would say, lock yourself in a box. And the more specific you are with your thesis, the less option, the less of a chance as the reader I'm going to have to say, this student is, off topic, or they're giving me stuff that's not relevant to this. So lock yourself in the box would be another strategy. And, the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you really need to do the research. You have to have a lot of research to be able to do this. Otherwise, that's when students start writing like throughout history or many historians, or politicians. And I'm thinking, well, who are these people? Lock yourself in the box. My vague site not have any excitement or suspense and give the reader strong. Like, this is interesting. Look, there are different ways of writing history. Some people, some historians, like I just made that, they have a narrative style of writing. And they try, like, these are debates in history, a narrative style. Like, it's about history. If you're, am I going to spell this right? An annal historian. An annal historian is only concerned with like documents, and they're like lawyers. These guys and gals are just trying to support with their documents. I actually have an assignment somewhere on there that looks at the style of writing history somewhere in here. I think it's one of the last things that we do. Let's go down here. There are different methods of writing history, and there's different interpretations and methods. It's this file right here, historical interpretation. The empiricists, the Marxists, the annals historians, psychohistorians. Psychohistorians are historians that, they kind of analyze, usually analyzing, individual figures, and they try to analyze them psychologically. A quantitative historian, these individuals just simply write with data. It's almost like, here's census data, here's immigration data. I can't dispute data. The data is what it is. Your interpretation, of that data could tell the story. The narrative historian writes like through a story. A revisionist is concerned about, writing the past again, and trying to find fault in the past. The annals, these individuals, they're looking at big institutions, big government. Like I said before, these individuals are really concerned with documents. They're the primary source people. Marxist historians always look at things through like a economic lens. Here we have more of the empiricists, where these individuals are also using the documents. But the annals historians, like, they're looking at like big institutions. Anyway, that's a lot for what we're focusing on here. Anyway, the point I was trying to make is that everybody's going to have a different style. So like, if you're going to just use document after document, it's almost like saying, okay, well, he gave me this prompt, and here's a document, here's another document, here's another document, I'm done. And that's a way to kind of approach your writing, where it's just you're providing documents. The narrative style is more of like a story. I expect to see a lot of that context, the transitions and things like that. Students, format, clear, concise argument. I can avoid this using hamburger method. Remember the hamburger method. You want to start with a topic sentence, then give me your source, and then 2 to 3 sentences, answering that question. How and why is the source relevant? Source important. That's kind of what my thesis section, my assumptions. And anyway,